talk about the Small Business Tax Literacy Project. This is a brand new initiative that we announced in April of this year that measures how business owners and gig workers are individuals who have business income outside of their traditional wages that they get from their jobs. So anybody with a side hustle, anybody engaging in freelance work, anybody that sells services outside of a traditional job to earn income, how they wrestle with or understand their tax filing obligations. I'm sure many of you have different understandings of tax laws where you're from at the state, national, or local level. In the United States, we have a very complex federal tax system, and we also have a state tax system. And I undertook this research to try to discern how business owners understand their own tax filing obligations. Do they know how to comply with the tax laws that apply to them? This is critically important because tax savings is a key way that business owners can help to access capital to fund their own business operations. Now, there is a massive $688 billion problem in the United States. And that problem is the level of taxes that are imposed by law and the level of taxes that are actually collected. There's a $688 billion gap between what's owed and what's actually collected. We refer to this as the tax gap. I wanted to consider this problem from the perspective of not whether people are willfully not paying their taxes or avoiding their tax payments, but whether they know what to do when tax time rolls around. Do they have baseline tax literacy to understand how to comply with their tax filing obligations? This is effectively a compliance problem. Now, there are all sorts of forms that employers and firms that pay independent contractors are required to send to workers in lieu of doing withholding of tax payment from employees' wages. So if you're an independent contractor, that's my puppy, apologies for that. You might work outside of traditional employment. She's very excited. It could be an Amazon delivery. But when you work outside of traditional employment, you are responsible for paying your own taxes. You do not have an employer that withholds a small amount from your paycheck to send it over to the Treasury. You instead have to preemptively do that. And that's called part of our pay-as-you-go system. Because in the United States, you pay taxes throughout the year that you earn income. And if you work for an employer, they pay it for you. Charlotte. They pay it for you. And then, hold on just 1 minute. I think that's a good introduction to my life. When I teach, I very much bring the reality of how I live into the classroom, and that happens when I teach online. Every once in a while, I have a crazy dog that barks like crazy, and I very much appreciate your patience with that. At the same time, I recognize as a professor, you all have things going on in your lives, and I really try to be as accommodating as possible because we all have things going on while we're trying to be professional and move through what we need to get through in various class sessions or what have you. So thank you very much in advance for your patience with my very loud, annoying dog. But to get back to what we're really talking about, we're talking about the tax gap and how it impacts tax collection and whether or not people actually know how to comply with their tax filing obligations. Now, when there are high rates of noncompliance, like the $688 billion tax gap, there are different things that governments can do to effectively work on their tax compliance. They can, number one, promote policies that promote education at the government level. Number two, they can increase enforcement. Or number three, they can reform the tax system. Those are basically the three things that governments can do, and they're not in isolation. They're really interconnected strategies that governments adapt. So as part of the Small Business Tax Literacy Project, what I have focused on is looking at the education piece, because that is an area that the Internal Revenue Service of the United States government and the U.S. Treasury Department has typically overlooked and not considered when trying to develop strategies to address the tax gap problem that I introduced earlier. In my view, if we can put together data and evidence that shows that people actually don't know how to comply with their tax filing obligations, rather than focusing exclusively on enforcement or the fact that it's willful evasion, might be another strategy that we can help people better comply and at the same time take advantage of tax breaks that result in tax savings for those folks. I also think it's important to recognize at this point that in the United States, there is a general literacy problem. And what do I mean by that? I mean that 32 million Americans cannot read. Our tax system is incredibly complex, and asking individuals and business owners who maybe just sell their services and perhaps don't have a formalized education or challenges with literacy to comply with an overly complex tax code is too heavy a lift. And are there ways that we can target those taxpayers to help them comply, while recognizing that literacy in this country is a challenge, like it is in many other places? I am not the only person that is focused on these issues. The OECD has put together an incredible study that measured a survey of 59 different countries that had developed a whole range of strategies and on tax education in particular. And they distributed a survey. 59 countries participated, 140 different tax education strategies were submitted in response to survey requests. And these tax education survey strategies generally fall into three different buckets of how you can increase compliance. You can teach tax, which means that you teach people how to comply with their tax obligations, and you target that based on specific populations, students, or business owners, or just individuals. For example, you can target retirees, or you can target younger people who are earlier on in their careers. But different teaching tax strategies targeted to specific populations was a popular strategy that the OECD survey identified. The second thing that you can do to help tax education generally is communicating tax. What are the communication strategies that different countries are doing to help folks look at tax education strategies? Are different countries incorporating AI into their tax administration services? That's another area where we are looking at very closely, because the Internal Revenue Service in the United States has a very antiquated website and doesn't use the latest technology to help people understand how to fill out their tax forms. Other things that you could do around communicating tax: building specific information campaigns or tailored messages. Are you using social media to help people comply with their tax obligations? At the same time, are there particular guardrails in place that account for misinformation strategies that can accompany different communication strategies, because there is widespread fraud and abuse with respect to actors taking advantage of innocent taxpayers trying to comply with their tax code. Lastly, are there specific assisting with tax programs? Do you help people actually file their taxes? These are a whole range of strategies that the OECD analyzed in terms of tax education generally. Now, why does this matter, and why are we at a business school really caring about this? We care about this because we recognize that how people work is changing. It is changing fundamentally, and it is a change that was accelerated as part and coming out of COVID. What you see on this slide is the survey data from a nonpartisan independent firm that tracks the independent workforce, people that don't work for employers for wages or salaries, but instead work for themselves as independent contractors, freelancers, or people with side hustles. And what this shows is that the most recent data is that there are now 65 million people in this country, in the United States, working outside of traditional employment. This is radically different than how Americans had, or people in the United States had long been measured in terms of the US workforce. It used to be that you worked for an employer, they paid your wages, they withheld a portion of your wages and sent it to the IRS in prepayment of your taxes as a ongoing throughout the year pay-as-you-go tax system. But when you work outside of that kind of relationship as a gig worker or independent contractor, you are responsible for doing the accounting, tax, and business planning around paying your taxes. But if you don't know how to do that, if you don't have the proper tax education, and in the United States, we don't typically teach tax education at either the high school or college levels, you don't know how to comply. And so that, my research suggests, is a major contributor to the overall tax gap. And as you will see from this data, this is a problem that is not stagnant. In fact, it is growing exponentially, and it has continued to grow since 2015, when this data was first starting to be collected. So in 2015, there were about 40 million people that had some sort of side hustle, were engaged in gig work or independent contract work, or part of the independent workforce. There are now 65 million as of 2022. And the latest numbers for 2023 show that that 65 million jumped one more time up to 72 million. More and more people are working remotely. They are working for themselves. They do not tend to show the same workforce patterns that we saw in the previous century or even in recent decades. Businesses have to change to accommodate this, and governments have to recognize that structural tax systems have to accommodate these major changes in workforce. This is the latest data from 2023, which shows that there is a 72 million Americans that are working outside of traditional employment. Why does this matter for gig workers? Well, it's part of their overall financial literacy to understand how they do their own accounting, business, and tax obligations. And we know that in general, in the United States, financial literacy curriculums, many of which are imposed at the high school level, do not include any kind of tax education. And so we know that there is a significant gap between what students are learning at the high school and college levels and what they understand their tax filing obligations to be. So to better measure this problem, I organized a survey together with my colleague, Barbara Robles, who is a tax economist and who worked for the U.S. Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C., and did lots of survey products to try to drill down to how to measure what people know about their tax filing obligations. We don't have time today to go through all of the survey details, but what I can tell you is we measured a population of small business owners, gig workers, and entrepreneurs, and we had a whole range of respondents from 20 to over 80. Most of our respondents were between 40 and 70 years old, and most of our respondents were white, and about 37% were not white. Overwhelmingly, our respondents of our population had at least a college degree. That is very different from general education trends in the United States. In fact, in the United States, approximately only a quarter of individuals have completed at least college. And what we found is, even though 76% of our survey respondents had a college degree compared to 24% of the general US population, only 13% of our survey respondents learned how to do their taxes in college. Even fewer learned how to do them in high school. And essentially what we figured out is that the tax filing obligations or rules that people were supposed to be able to comply with and understand were essentially a great big mystery to a huge range of business owners that we surveyed. Approximately 1/3 of our respondents didn't know whether or not they had to pay quarterly estimated payments, which is how individuals that work outside of traditional employment pay their taxes. And a quarter just didn't know how to pay their taxes at all. 54% of our respondents didn't set aside any money to pay their taxes, and 30% didn't know and also didn't set aside any money to pay taxes. But interestingly, 37% of the respondents that we surveyed felt nervous, scared, or bad about filing taxes. Filing taxes is a tremendous source of stress and anxiety for a number of individuals. And this is what our survey data confirms. We learned that education is not in place and that individuals are stressed, scared, and upset when it comes to tax time. That gives credence to our research and view that the United States government should take additional steps to target specifically tax education strategies like all these other countries have done around the world, as is tracked by the OECD's survey data. So what do we do with this? We have all of this incredible research. We know that this is a problem, but it's not enough just to do the research. We also have to fundamentally attack the problem and deal with it at a policy level. So we take the research that we do, we communicate it to officials at the U.S. Department of Treasury. I have been presenting all of this research at major tax, accounting, and law conferences to raise awareness and build consensus for a comprehensive strategy in order to attack these problems at the U.S. federal government level, and also to generate more research from colleagues that also could be helpful in attacking this problem and designing strategies that can impact these overall trends that we have identified. But we also attack this research and our findings at Kogod. I developed a class with my accounting colleagues to teach tax education to undergraduate students. We developed that class in 2021, and we actually had it adopted by the university at as part of the AU undergraduate core, because we know that we need a formal option to help people learn how to do their taxes at the university level. That's just a really small fraction of the kind of research that we do. And what I hope is a way that you can understand how we really begin to target the research that we do, how we communicate it across both the nation and with policymakers, stakeholders, but then more practically, how we take that research and we actually use it at the university. It is not just research that we publish in a journal for a publication citation count. that wouldn't mean very much. And that's not what our active research faculty at Kogod is about. We are change makers. That is part of Kogod. That is part of who we are. And that's how we conduct our research. And that's how we communicate our research. So if you start to follow, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, or if you start to follow Kogod on any of our social media channels, you'll see over and over again professors who are communicating their research to policymakers or to Congress, or really trying to not only develop groundbreaking, important research for the classroom and for their colleagues in whatever discipline in which they are experts, but also having impactful research, because we believe at Kogod that business is a force for meaningful change. That's not just our motto, it's part of our DNA. It's part of how professors really approach their jobs, both in the classroom and outside the classroom, with respect to their research. So I'm happy to share that slide deck with anyone who is further interested. I am very hopeful that we will see some important new trends announced out of IRS with respect to education for gig workers based on the survey data that we've done. Our next steps are we are looking to do another survey of a broader national population. And we hope to engineer that survey work and have nationalized results, hopefully by next April, that we can announce and really reiterate over and over again how we know that this is a problem, and we can nudge and prompt the IRS to actually address more comprehensive strategies to change it. But fundamentally, what I'm trying to do is revolutionize how we teach financial literacy at the undergraduate and high school levels to include tax literacy. There are too many young kids that we see that don't know anything about how to comply with their taxes, and we really need to give them the tools to effectively comply with their taxes so that they can, be able to generate capital on their own initiative from tax savings to better fund their businesses. So thank you so much for your time.
If you like this video, click the bell icon for more such content.